Gacha games tend to be notorious for their tutorial characters, aka starting units, to lag behind in power sooner than later as a means of incentivizing players to make use of the gacha system to pull for more units, namely the higher tiered ones. It's sort of the opposite to the likes of Pokemon. While the overall intent behind both is to amass as big of a collection of playable characters as possible, for the former, it's presumably encouraged for you to keep your starter with you at all times, no matter how often you switch out the other 5 party members, as a lifelong partner so to speak. It's the opposite for the latter. There are exceptions, but from the many gachas I played in my time, few if any of them expect you to keep your initial roster. In fact, said roster tends to get power creeped practically after the first couple months of the game's timeline, and that is where we find our main character for Honkai Star Rail. Curiously though, Trailblazer's story doesn't quite follow the same format as that of its predecessor. Most of you have likely seen my Why No One Plays episode for Aether and Lumine, collectively referred to as The Traveler, and while they have had recent success with their Dendro variant following the release of that video, all expectations for improvement vanished with their Hydro iteration, so it's safe to say that people still consider Traveler a second-rate unit. Kaila's and Stell's situation is identical in some ways but different in others. You may notice on the thumbnail the gray text in the physical icon implying I'm referring to just one version of the Traveler. This episode of Why No One Plays will be somewhat different in that while I will be going over the issues of the character, I'll also be talking about how my theory is that it was actually intended to be this way, given what we know about their other version and what we can speculate will happen going forward. I think the first thing we should do is lay out the differences in characteristics between Kaila's and Stell and Aether and Lumine. Both are designed to be self-inserts, allowing the player some semblance of choice in how they want to conduct their behavior, and while this can allow for some very fun interactions every now and then, usually the Traveler and Trailblazer have a more subdued, muted personality so as to make them as agnostic as possible. A property shared between them is their ability to quote-unquote transform, giving the player freedom in how they want to play them, which aligns with the motif of the MC serving as a depiction of you. For instance, in Genshin, the Traveler is currently able to assimilate 5 of the 7 elements, gaining new abilities corresponding to each one. Playstyle-wise, Aether and Lumine serve to introduce you to the central theme of the element in question. Animo being about elemental absorption and crowd control, Geo being about constructs, Electro being about battery, Dendro being about reaction combinations, and Hydro being complete dog shit. And Hydro being about HP scaling and using health itself as an offensive resource. While there are functionally unique playstyles for each element, Traveler generally takes a more supportive or off-field DPS focused role for the majority of them. Genshin doesn't have an established class system the way Star Rail does. It's based on roles like on-fielder, off-fielder, support, driver, etc. There's more emphasis placed on elements. On the other hand, character diversification in Star Rail is predicated on classes more than elements, although there's still some modicum of that. As a result, the Trailblazer is more nuanced in differentiation between one version to the next, and is primarily the reason why I'm making this Why No One Plays episode specifically on physical Trailblazer, as I have a greater reason to believe that Kaila's and Stell will evolve to be more useful as time goes on. In addition to the Trailblazers receiving a new element upon transformation, they also receive a new path designation and subsequently a drastically different playstyle. Physical Trailblazer adheres to the Destruction Path, serving as an all-purpose damage dealer equipped to handle any combat scenario, appropriate for introducing players to the facets of Star Rail's combat. Fire Trailblazer, on the other hand, is of the Preservation Path, not just gaining a new weapon in the form of a humongous burning spear, but completely altering the role to now serve as an aggro tank. Still dealing a fair bit of damage, but mainly serving as a protector, not an attacker. There is a notable diversion in playstyle from physical to fire, and with the number of paths equaling the number of elements, it's safe to assume that with each new element comes a new path as well. Hypothetically speaking, we can have an imaginary Harmony Trailblazer, a Quantum Abundance, Lightning Hunt, Wind Erudition, etc. The Fire Trailblazer has more potential for usage now, and they will later. At present, they're a fairly competitive option due to having consistent AoE damage and more unique utility as opposed to traditional tanks like Wushuan and Japart. They're not top tier by any means, but I don't think it would be right to include both versions of Trailblazer in this discussion. That brings us to Physical Trailblazer, the default version of Kaila's and Stell and the first one you get. In typical Gacha MC fashion, you're lucky to find anyone who's at the endgame who still uses them. Unlike our last episode where Arlen had a distinct niche that was kneecapped by poor design and nerfs from the beta, Trailblazer is defined by the absence of any niche whatsoever. In fact, while Destruction is known for being the general combat DPS path, almost everyone within excels at a specific field. Blade's all about HP scaling, Clara's about aggro and counter tanking, Hook is damage over time, Arlen's about low HP, Lunai Danheng's about SP loading, Shui Yi's about ignoring weaknesses, so on and so forth. Trailblazer, on the other hand, is kind of all over the place. I'll remind you that this is good to have on a starting unit so as to be usable for all facets of combat, but it doesn't do any favors for longevity. Their very bland nature makes it hard for them to particularly excel in anything, whether practically or thematically. Jack of all trades damage dealers are, in my opinion, the worst kind of archetype in terms of value. You can have all-purpose supports like Renmei and Tingyun, as their backstage presence allows them to work towards a multitude of parties and characters. The damage dealer, however, is the prima donna, therefore if the star of the show falls short, no amount of backstage presence can bail them out, as we've seen for the previous 2 episodes. It's here that we encounter the first problem with physical Trailblazer. They're trying to do too much, spreading their power budget too thin, resulting them in being an unexceptional choice for pretty much any role. Contrary to Yanqing and Arlen, who take too much effort to reach their peak performance, Trailblazer couldn't be easier to play. Their ultimate simply lets you perform a stronger version of their basic attack or skill, both of which consist of straightforward attacks to enemies. Their talent grants a bonus attack buff that lasts for the entirety of battle whenever they inflict weakness break on enemies, demanding a bit more tact as you want to achieve weakness breaks with them and not someone else by accident, but that's an elementary task for most in light of the game's turn-based nature, affording you plenty of time in planning moves out even in the midst of a fight. Not to mention their E6 adds an easier way you can stack up the talent. Apart from that, the rest of their traces are also pedestrian. A2 gives energy at the start of a battle, giving more uses of their ultimate, A4 allows their talent to give bonus defense alongside bonus attack, and A6 is just more damage to the primary target of the base and empowered version of this skill. Extremely self-explanatory and one of the easiest characters in the game to play. How this works against them is that they were essentially designed to be played solo, as stated before, with them being spread too thin across multiple things. When looking at other damage dealers, you'll find almost all aspects of their kit are dedicated to increasing damage, whether bonus energy for more ult spam, bonus damage, more crit, what have you. Physical Trailblazer has a few of those as well, but the amount of extraneous material in their repertoire is higher than that of their peers. Their technique is a small heal for the entire team, quite useful in the early game when you probably don't have access to a strong healer until well into the Arilla 6 questline where you get Natasha. It's a good overworld boost to have for those unwilling to backtrack to a space anchor to restore health. A4 grants bonus defense, good for survival but unconducive to DPS, as Physical Trailblazer has no defense scaling in their kit. Finally, given Eidolons are freely accessible for the MC, there's E2, granting honest sustain when attacking enemies with a physical weakness. Again, these traits are good to have, especially in the early game before players have enough characters, but you lose out on what could have been DPS productive traces and Eidolons in exchange for them. Putting it bluntly, Physical Trailblazer falls off significantly in damage as you progress towards the mid to late game. Even using Arlen for comparison, which isn't exactly the most ideal point of reference to begin with, Frenzied Punishment deals 320% at rank 10 to the main enemy, which is just shy of Trailblazer's 337.5 if we include A6. However, while Trailblazer's only damage amp comes in the form of up to a 40% attack boost, Arlen's DPS amp comes in the form of general damage and up to 72% at that, giving him a greater ceiling, albeit with very high maintenance. Trailblazer's scaling is just not up to par since there really isn't any scaling in their kit apart from base damage. This means what you see is what you get, and what you get doesn't lend itself to being considered a high value character. Another physical damage is Su Shang, who by all accounts is not the most impressive unit either, but if you take a look at her moveset, there's a lot of room for investment in her. For instance, giving Su Shang more battery not only enables her to use more ultimates, but she gets to boost her skill damage as well thanks to having 2 more chances to trigger the bonus damage. Trailblazer has nothing but the 40% attack boost, absolutely nothing. There's no multiplicative or exponential scaling in their kit. Increasing their speed will net you just a 1-to-1 benefit. Increasing ultimate usage is again just a 1-to-1 benefit, whereas for some units, increasing speed can imply faster stacking or increasing ultimate usage gives more uptime. Unless you forget they have better innate scaling to begin with. It's not like they can moonlight as another role either, since none of their utility-centric skills are substantial enough to adequately deliver on the role in question. Sure, the technique lets them heal their party, but you can't call them a healer as that's only in the overworld, wherein you can simply make use of healing consumables for the same outcome. You can't call them a tank even with the on-hit regen and the bonus defense, as they have no way to draw aggro or distribute that defense to the team. If say the E2 regen applied to the whole team, then maybe they could double as a healer, but that's a man-sized maybe. In other words, the party will receive no benefit from those utility skills. This jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none playstyle is also what gives players no reason to use them over other choices who can outperform them in that specific field. Star Rail's combat, the endgame combat anyway, can get very specific. If not imposed by the game itself, then the playstyle you endeavor to choose for that run. Memory of Chaos is a standard gauntlet of fights either with isolated enemies or groups of them. Initially, this would seem favorable to Trailblazer as they're built to handle any situation in theory, which is true and applicable here until you realize the memory turbulence always has something that favors DPS units in some way, shape, or form. For example, the MOC buff for a cycle could be bonus damage over time, bonus follow-up attack damage, bonus damage for every point of SP used, bonus break damage, etc. You'll find that virtually every other unit in the game can make more efficient use of those buffs than Trailblazer, since they only ever receive a portion of the maximum benefit that could be received due to not having a fully dedicated moveset. Pure Fiction's more or less the same. Being a destruction unit with blast attacks, they're not the worst out there, but now they're competing for market share against both members of their path and their addition units. Things might seem a bit different in games like Storm Disaster and Golden Gears, where you can essentially make your own path, but once again, Blessings, Path Resonance, Curios, and stuff will almost certainly benefit other units to a greater extent than Trailblazer because their lack of a clear niche. Further exacerbating their standing is that they essentially have to compete against all 3 DPS paths. In general, hunt units are only expected to compete with other hunt units. It's not right or reasonable for a hunt character to be compared with an erudition, as hunt units aren't supposed to be meant for AoE attacks and vice versa. With Trailblazer lacking a distinct playstyle and being a destruction unit, that automatically means they're going to be evaluated against the entire roster and get destroyed by the entire roster. They do have a strong single target attack with their ultimate and power normal, but at that point you might as well play Dr. Ratio. They do have a strong AoE attack with their ultimate empowered skill, but why do that when there's Herda, Acheron, Clara, Himeko, Jingyuan, Argenti, Lunai Danheng, Jingliu, Kafka, the personification of gambling addiction herself? Need I say more? There's ultimately no reason to use them in anything. They're never going to be as good as another choice. But the single biggest reason why I think they're not played now, nor will they ever be, ironically has to do with the Trailblazer themselves. I mentioned in the beginning that on top of receiving a new element, Trailblazer receives a new path designation, fundamentally altering their playstyle and the purpose they serve for the team. Though you're allowed to remotely choose which version you want to be simply by accessing their character tab, a feature we've been dying for miHoYo to give to Genshin's Traveler, you can never have both versions of Trailblazer simultaneously. Unlike physical Trailblazer, Fire Trailblazer actually has a niche, aggro tanking, giving you more of a reason to stay on fire if and when you need them. As they acquire new paths and elements, there will be even more consideration for opportunity cost. Even if there is a scenario where you could see a reason to use physical Trailblazer, you could probably construct a team around, say, Imaginary Harmony Trailblazer or Ice Erudition Trailblazer, and that team is almost guaranteed to outperform whatever you could possibly come up with for a physical Trailblazer. But actually, I think that was intended right from the start. In contrast to Aether and Lumine, who basically change what color shirt they want to wear based on whichever element they feel like corresponding to, in my eyes, Trailblazer's story feels more like a progression or a cultivation. After being impaled by Cocolia, you go through that cutscene with Kleepaw, bestowing upon you the path of preservation and rejoining the fight with the new Burning Lance. That's the distinction between the two. While in Genshin it feels like Aether and Lumine simply changed their power, in Star Rail, Kailas and Stell absorb new power, adding it to themselves. It makes perfect sense why Fire Trailblazer is stronger and more practical than Physical Trailblazer because it's 2 paths versus 1. It's not a transformation, it's an evolution. You're not switching powers, you're stockpiling power. Kind of like the One for All quirk from MHA, I guess. I like to clarify that I'm not lore buff. Many are more qualified than I am at this. But that to me is the theory behind why Physical Trailblazer is so weak. That's their basest form, they're level 1. As they acquire more paths, they'll get stronger to where eventually they become like the Avatar and have control over all paths and destroy everything. I like to believe that's the case. Maybe Star Rail has an actual sense of progression for the MC, starting them out weak, but making them stronger and stronger as time goes on. Unlike Aether and Lumine, who have an established past and stuff, the Trailblazer has no past, no memory of it anyway. They're for all intents and purposes the same as March 7th, where it's a brand new journey for them. There's no goal of trying to find their long-lost sibling to go back to what they were doing. They're a blank slate. There's no going back. There's only going forward. Alright, I'm getting too deep into this. You're here for gameplay discussion, not lore. The long and short of it is, Physical Trailblazer is generic to a fault. They have no niche, which makes it basically impossible to find a place in the meta, and the likelihood of future Trailblazer versions having more staying power is extremely high given the differences in how they're going about Star Rail's MC and Genshin's MC. But what do you guys think? Do you believe I'm underselling them, or do you agree with my points? You're welcome to share your thoughts in the comments down below. For now, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you could leave a like and subscribe. Consider following me on Twitter at Vars, joining my Discord server, and checking out my other Why No One Plays videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.